Hey, I want to tell you a secret. The Saints are probably going to hire Kellen Moore, but don't tell anybody. All right. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the New Orleans Saints are possibly in the midst of the worst kept secret in the NFL right now. So we'll explain why. We'll dive into a potential coaching staff that could follow the expected hire of Kellen Moore. We'll also take a look at what Kellen Moore's thoughts on the quarterback room actually might be, what it can mean, and some alternative moves that the New Orleans Saints could make if Kellen Moore decides that the quarterback room isn't to his liking. But we're going to start everything off with, again, what feels like the worst kept secret in the NFL right now, which is that Kellen Moore is basically the top candidate for the New Orleans Saints coaching job, but no one can say that. Let's break all that down and I'll explain why. We appreciate you very much as always, whether it's your first time or your next time, for making us your first listen of the day and for being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by friends over at Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Terms and conditions apply. So, look, the New Orleans Saints are probably gonna hire Kellen Moore, or at least are very interested in hiring Kellen Moore as their next head coach. It's a big secret. No one wants you to know. Look, there's a reason for the vagueness and kind of the hush-hush of all this. In fact, there's actually multiple reasons for it. So I kind of wanted to just peel the curtain back a little bit and kind of explain like why the vagueness, why the shrouded language, why all these things are. But the bottom line is that Philadelphia Eagles offensive coordinator Kellen Moore is now the favorite to land the New Orleans Saints head coaching job, and that could happen as soon as the day after the Super Bowl, which is when a hire can become official and is literally the next time the New Orleans Saints are allowed to talk to Kellen Moore, which is super interesting because Kellen Moore and the Philadelphia Eagles will be at the New Orleans Saints facility all week next week, getting ready for the Super Bowl. But Saints can't talk to him during that time. They're not allowed, right? They would be considered tampering and all these other things. So here's why you're seeing things like, oh, the New Orleans Saints are expected to have a conversation or a third meeting with Kellen Moore the day after the Super Bowl, which is what was reported by several members of NFL media. Ian Rappaport, Garofalo talked about it. Pelissero talked about it as well. And so the reason why you're hearing like, oh, it's the meeting, it's another meeting, as opposed to, hey, the Saints are interested in hiring, they want to hire, they're going to hire, they're expected to hire, is because like technically no one that's involved that's kind of been reporting the biggest part of the story so far is kind of allowed to say that, right? Like the Saints can't say, hey, we're planning on hiring Kellen Moore. I guess technically they could if they wanted to, but there's reasons not to do that because at any point Kellen Moore could still about face, right? He could still say, you know what? We got super close in the Super Bowl, came up short. We feel like we can get there, get over the hump. I want to help this team do that next season. Bang, I'm back in Philadelphia. The Philadelphia Eagles could win the Super Bowl, and then Kellen Moore could say, you know what? We feel like we could do it again, and so I'm staying in Philly. I want to push for a second title here in Philadelphia. Both things would be perfectly logical and perfectly understandable. So you're not going to hear the New Orleans Saints come out and say, hey, fans, our next head coach is going to be coaching the Super Bowl if you want to watch this weekend, only for him then to turn around and say, you know what, actually, I'm staying in Philly, right? Like that's still possible that could happen. The other part is Rappaport, Pelissero, Garofalo, like all those guys work for NFL media, right? That's not a bad thing, but they're beholden to some of the same NFL rules. So you're going to see their language reflect the NFL rules as well. So you're going to see things like, hey, they're having this other meeting. He's the favorite. He's the top candidate. The stars are aligning. The dominoes are falling. The puzzle pieces are falling in place. The writing is on the wall, whatever cliche you want to use. I'm actually impressed that I rattled off 4 different cliches for that. They can say all those things, but they can't say, hey, the Saints are planning to hire Kellen Moore, or they're going to hire Kellen Moore, or they want to hire Kellen Moore. Because for the same things, like for the same reason that I'm not going to come up here and say, hey, Kellen Moore is going to be the next head coach of the New Orleans Saints, because at any point he could about face and all of a sudden I've lied to you and you don't deserve that. You're a fan of the team. You want to know who's going to be the next head coach of your favorite football team. You don't deserve to be lied to. So you're not even going to hear me come out and say, hey, this is definitely going to happen. But I'm probably going to be able to be a little bit more liberal with the idea than others, because I'm not beholden to the NFL in any way. I'm beholden to you and you only. And so that's why I'm comfortable saying like, hey, yeah, this is probably where this is headed. But because the NFL rules are that the Saints and Kellen Moore cannot come to any kind of agreement until he is done coaching the Super Bowl, you're going to see a lot of NFL media's language reflect that. There's a good chance. And look, we said this in yesterday's episode that the Friday of the Senior Bowl was probably going to be the day that we were going to get some major development in this, because this is typically when the last hires or the big hires of the coaching cycle finish up. People are releasing the information that they got during their time here in Mobile and all that other stuff. That's pretty usual, right? Last year's exact same thing happened with the Clint Kubiak hire. Friday of the Senior Bowl, that was the day that came out that the Saints were expected to hire. Now that technically is a little bit more judicious in terms of like how they phrase that then versus how they're phrasing it now, but head coach, offensive coordinator, a little bit different. So the next piece to all this is like, what other signs are there that Kellen Moore is the front runner or is the top candidate for the New Orleans Saints? Well, the next candidate in line would probably have been interim head coach, special teams coordinator, assistant head coach Darren Rizzi. Darren Rizzi, a report came out, is now going to be considered the front runner to land in Denver. Now, we've talked about that a bunch, that like he could go back and land with Sean Payton. The Denver Broncos fired their special teams coordinator. They have not filled that position yet. You could easily see Darren Rizzi go back and be a part of Sean Payton's coaching staff again. Sean Payton hired him here in New Orleans in 2019, or hired him in New Orleans. Sorry, I'm still in Mobile. But hired him in New Orleans back in 2019. The two could reunite over in Denver, and it would make perfect sense. Everyone would expect that. Now, the Saints have told all of their other candidates, reportedly, Nick Underhill, New Orleans Football, that the coaching search is going to go beyond the Super Bowl. That's a sign, right? Having a third meeting with Kellen Moore after the Super Bowl, that's a sign, right? Message, if you will. Darren Rizzi and the news coming out that he's probably the favorite for the Denver Broncos thing. He's lining up another opportunity. That's a sign, right? So everything's aligning to say that this is going to go the way of the New Orleans Saints, at least offering the position to Kellen Moore. He still has to accept it. And there are still some things that can happen that turn him away from the job. One of which is wanting to stay in Philadelphia. The second of which is that maybe he doesn't feel like he gets the contract terms that he wants in terms of length, patience, money, please. Like that's a big part of it as well. And then the other thing is not all of a sudden, I mean, we knew this was going to happen, but the quarterback room has been brought into question for the New Orleans Saints. And so I want to dive into next the quarterback room, what Kellen Moore's feelings on it might be, what a recent report was actually saying and why it was taken out of context, but why it all still holds some water and what could happen next at the New Orleans Saints quarterback room based on the hire for head coach. Let's get to that next here as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by friends over at Game Time, the other worst kept secret in sports, because Game Time is the worst kept secret of the best place to go to buy your tickets to your favorite sporting events. They've also got concerts, comedy, theater, and much more as well. And look, kind of makes you look like a little bit of a baller too, because sometimes tickets get more affordable as you get closer and closer to the event. So you're hanging out inconspicuously, you pop up the Game Time app, check to see what's going on in your city, your significant other's favorite artist is in town for a concert, bang, hey, I just picked up some last minute tickets to go, and you didn't break the bank in the process. Makes you look super dope. So go check them out today over at Game Time. You can also see views for your seats before you buy them. I just love the transparency of the app. So if you're ready to make your next event even better, do so by downloading the Game Time app today. Create an account and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You're getting $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, make sure you use that code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints may have their eyes fixed on their next head coach, but are there concerns for that potential next head coach around the New Orleans Saints quarterback room? I don't think so, but I want to explore what the options are when it comes to, if Kellen Moore is the next head coach, what he can do at the quarterback position. So let's kind of lay a little bit of the groundwork here first, because the fact of the matter is that Kellen Moore is probably going to work with Derek Carr in 2025 if he ends up taking the job. If he doesn't, then there are other options. And in 2026, he can go out and find his own quarterback, right? So if Kellen Moore takes the job, you can expect some fluidity at the quarterback position 2025, 2026. He'll get the opportunity to go and get his next quarterback. I'll tell you why that's the case. But let me explain why we're having this conversation. That's the overall takeaway that you need to know. So we'll get to that. But the reason why we're having this conversation is because Diana Rossini, Chase Daniels, they have this fantastic podcast, Scoop City. And on that show, Diana Rossini was talking about how the scuttlebutt or the chit chat here in Mobile centered around the Saints head coaching position as to why Kellen Moore could potentially not be interested. And if he were not to be interested, what would be the driving cause? And a lot of folks have talked about the quarterback position here in Mobile. I can confirm that. Almost everybody that I talked to, when it came down to people asking me, well, what do you think they're going to do at the position or at the head coach spot? And I mentioned like, well, Kellen Moore's probably the front runner, all these other things. The question always becomes, well, what are they going to do at quarterback, right? That's always the first thing that gets questioned. And that's just the way that the NFL media, all of that look at the Saints situation right now is what are they going to do at quarterback? There's no long-term plan at quarterback right now, which is actually kind of a good thing for a first-time head coach. First-time head coach comes in, gets somebody else's quarterback. That's a free year. Then gets to go and get their own quarterback, someone that they want to work with that's not, brought in by the previous regime, whether they're free agency, the draft, and they get to affix their future to a quarterback of their choosing. This is always the case with head coaches. And so that's what I expect that we're going to see here with Kellen Moore. But when Diana Rossini was talking about it, what she was talking about was like the idea that Kellen Moore could potentially say no has been based on, for a lot of people, the quarterback room. Not that Kellen Moore has openly said that he has an issue and that he's not thrilled with the quarterback room, right? And even if he wasn't thrilled with the quarterback room, her very next sentence was that he's come around to the idea of coaching the Saints and that perhaps believes that New Orleans is the right place for him. We'll find out if it is the right place for him come Monday after the Super Bowl and then, the next couple of years after that. But the response to the report was that of, well, Kellen Moore said he doesn't like the quarterbacks. And that's not really what the report said, right? The report was more like, hey, people are talking about how the quarterback position or the quarterback room could be concerning to Kellen Moore. And so that would be the reason why he might turn around and say no. It's a very, very different conversation where you're talking about people speculating about why a coach might say no versus when you're saying this is a concern that a coach brought up. Now, let's say that this was a report that was around the idea that, look, Kellen Moore might not be, and this was a light way of putting out there, Kellen Moore might not be attracted to this job because of the quarterback position. That to me is a money play. I'm just going to be real. That's a money play for Kellen Moore, I mean. So when it comes to that, of course you're not super excited about the quarterback room. Who would be right now, right? You have a 34-year-old quarterback that doesn't have a future with the organization beyond the next couple of years. He knows that. The organization knows that. Everyone should know that. It's not like he's going to sign a 10-year contract and play until he's 44. That's not going to happen. You're watching effectively the twilight of Derek Carr's career. You don't have anybody on a rookie contract right now that's got multiple seasons of starting experience. You have a guy on a rookie contract right now that has a lot of potential and a lot of promise in Spencer Rattler, but you don't have multiple years of starting quarterbacks or multiple years of starting experience on a rookie contract, which allows you then to go and spend money at a bunch of different areas. And honestly, even if you had multiple years of starting experience when it came to Spencer Rattler, he's on a rookie contract, but there's a guy in the building that's taking up $40 million per year at the position. So you don't have the flexibility that you would typically have with your expenditures or with your budget, as if you just had your starting guy and your big guy, your number one guy on a rookie deal. And then behind that, you've got a guy that's a career backup projection in the NFL and Jake Haener. And so you have to find what your future is going to be at quarterback. And no head coach, especially an offensive head coach, is going to go out here and say, wow, that's a challenge I don't want. You know what I mean? So even if the report is more overtly, hey, Kellen Moore is not super comfortable with the quarterback room, well, then get over here and fix it, bruh. Like that's the gig, my guy. And that's typically what you would see in that case is, hey, that's a lot of work you're asking me to do coming in as a first-time head coach. Like, I'm going to need to add another milli or so to this deal. You know what I mean? And so you're looking for the reasons you're trying to poke holes. It's negotiation, right? So if that is the case, which is not explicitly at all what Diana Russini reported. So I'm putting a line in between what we were discussing in terms of what Diana Russini was explicitly reporting and now the like hypothetical if this was the situation. So let's just continue with the hypothetical now. And say, okay, Kellen Moore's not thrilled with the New Orleans Saints quarterback room. What does that mean? Why is that the case? Get my Brian Windhorse on. Well, we discussed why that would be the case, actually, right? You got an aging quarterback that's in the twilight of his career, that's been in the league 11 years, that hasn't won a playoff game, and it's unlikely that you're going to find a guy or any guy in NFL history that has really had a decade of that, and then all of a sudden turns a corner, right? It's just, and if it happens, it's an outlier of a situation, and it's awesome if that happens, but unlikely that happens, right? I wouldn't put money on that. And then you've got the young guys that up to now are still what I would call unproven, incomplete evaluation. And so with all that in mind, what do? Well, you've got a couple options. You could tell the Saints, I'm taking the job. Derek Carr's not my guy. I want to make a move now, move off of him, free up some money on the books, let us start the rebuild and all that stuff, start building around the quarterback position. And then what are the options? You can roll with Spencer Rattler, give him the opportunity to start in this system, work with him. He'll be your quarterback for that year, but he's still not necessarily your quarterback. So you got the flexibility there. He's also a second-year player, so you get the patience that you're looking for. The other thing you could do is go into free agency and try to bring somebody in. Everyone is in love with the idea of Justin Fields. I get it. I understand. I don't think Justin Fields is leaving Pittsburgh. I think you're going to see Russell Wilson leave Pittsburgh, potentially end up in Las Vegas. And then the rest of the quarterback free agent class is boo-boo. Like nothing that you want to be messing around with. And Sam Darnold's going to get massively overpaid to go and be mediocre somewhere and all these other things. Like don't get involved with that, right? You already have the swollen quarterback contract for a guy that you were hoping was going to come in. And honestly has performed up to that contract based on what those contracts are, but you don't have the space to do another one of those contracts. So if you're going to move off of Derek Carr this offseason, don't go and give another Derek Carr level contract. Go and get a veteran guy that's going to be able to come in and work with your young room. The other option is that you go to the draft, but you can't trade up because trading up in this year's draft for a quarterback would just be foolish. And then who are the viable options behind Shedeur Sanders and Cam Ward? Okay, Jackson Dart is somebody that has gotten a lot of conversation of getting up into the first round and stuff like that. So could you take him at 9? Sure, but do you want to? Probably not. You're probably better off taking a Kyle McCord later out of Syracuse or something like that, or a Jalen Milroe later, and allowing him to actually play quarterback, and then focusing on building the car around the driver. Then you plug in the driver at a later time. The other option is you roll with Derek Carr in 2025, and then you go and get your quarterback in 2026, whether that's via free agency or via the draft. Logical, right? Absolutely logical. The way that we know that is going to be the case and that Mickey Loomis and the New Orleans Saints are going to allow Kellen Moore to do that is because they did it for Sean. Sean Payton showed up. He wanted Drew Brees. He got Drew Brees. Dennis Allen showed up, dealt with a year of Jameis, dealt with a year of Andy Dalton. That was all the same year. Wanted Derek Carr. The defensive head coach got to handpick his quarterback. Said and done. Kellen Moore is going to get the opportunity if he accepts the job and does indeed become the New Orleans Saints' next head coach. He will get the opportunity in that case to handpick his quarterback. Whether it happens in 2025 or 2026, though, that's the part that remains to be seen. Coming up next, not only does he get an opportunity to handpick his quarterback, he also gets an opportunity to handpick his coaching staff. So let's take a look at some of the coaching staff members that could potentially follow Kellen Moore, should he be the hire in New Orleans, as he builds out his coaching staff next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at Prize Picks, the easiest and most fun way to play daily fantasy sports. The big game is almost here. It's already going to be a lot of fun. You can make it even more fun by checking out Prize Picks today. It's you versus the house. All you got to do is pick 2 to 6 players, choose whether or not they're going to come in at more or less than their Prize Picks projections. Saquon Barkley, a touchdown, more or less. That simple. You get that right on 2 to 6 players, you get up to 1,000 times your money, and they're going to make it even easier for you. You get a free square up for the big game. Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City Chiefs quarterback, throws for 1 yard. You get a win. You get a free square right there. Then that takes that 2 to 6 down to 1 to 5, and you can take home some cash. And right now, with the fast withdrawals, you can even get cash out of your account in as little as 15 minutes. Go and check them out today. Download the Prize Picks app and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. You'll get $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. That's promo code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 when you play your first $5 lineup instantly. When you check out Prize Picks, run your game. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. If Kellen Moore is indeed the New Orleans Saints' next head coach, he has a pretty extensive network of potential assistant coaches to bring in and help to fill out the New Orleans Saints staff. Remember, the Saints are going to be looking for a defensive coordinator, an offensive coordinator, and potentially we'll be looking for a special teams coordinator, though I think the special teams coordinator replacement is actually in the building for New Orleans. But I want to take a look at 4 names that you should know. I'm really going to give you 5 or 6, but I want to focus on 4 names that you should know. The first thing I'm going to mention isn't one of the official names, but I mentioned this in a previous episode. Kirby Moore is a name to know, offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach for Missouri. The Saints could see Andrew Janocko head over to join Clint Kubiak over in Seattle, opening up the quarterbacks coach position. A guy like Kirby Moore, the little brother of Kellen Moore, could potentially make the leap to the NFL under his brother to take a quarterback coach role or an assistant quarterback coach role or something like that. So just a name to know: Kellen Moore, Kirby Moore, his little brother. But here are the 4 key names that I want you to know: Doug Nussmeier, Brandon Staley. Don't do that. Let me get to it. Derek Ansley and Jeff Stoutland. Don't do that either. Let me get to these. Let me get to each of these. So I want to start off with Doug Nussmeier. Doug Nussmeier is a really interesting one. Obviously has some connection to New Orleans. You know what I'm saying? But as a part of that, the connection between Kellen Moore and Doug Nussmeier is that Doug Nussmeier, is right now the Eagles quarterbacks coach. And so as the Eagles quarterbacks coach and former LSU Tiger coach, and whose son is currently an LSU Tiger quarterback in Garrett Nussmeier, it could create some interesting sort of alignments at a later time, especially if Kellen Moore isn't super interested in the quarterbacks that are here in New Orleans going into 2026, but maybe likes a Garrett Nussmeier. All of a sudden, a Doug Nussmeier's on staff and all these other things. Lots of family things happen in the NFL like that. But really, the idea here isn't necessarily, honestly, to bring in Doug Nussmeier so that you could potentially draft Garrett Nussmeier. You could draft Garrett Nussmeier if you want to draft Garrett Nussmeier. It doesn't matter. It's like he can say, no, you can't pick me. Like, you're getting drafted, buddy. Come here. You know, it's going to be that simple. But Doug Nussmeier, a very respected coach, also a guy that has a ton of connections as well to help fill out the rest of that offensive staff if you need a little bit of help there, but gives you somebody that is like understands the city, the state, the community, the culture, all those other things that can kind of help you along. But then also is also a very solid quarterbacks coach and has been throughout his time. I think he is also is he also the passing game coordinator? No, he's just the quarterbacks coach. He's just the quarterbacks coach for Philly. So you could bring him and give him a little bit of an extra bump by giving him like the pass game coordinator title or something like that as well. So Doug Nussmeier, just a name to know that could travel with Kellen Moore should Andrew Janocko head over to travel and take the gig with the Seattle Seahawks, where he's expected to interview. And so that could open up that quarterback coach vacancy. So Doug Nussmeier, a name to know there. Over on the defensive side, Brandon Staley's a name to think of. And this is kind of interesting, but this is the way that the NFL works sometimes. Brandon Staley hired Kellen Moore as his offensive coordinator with the Los Angeles Chargers after Kellen Moore left the Dallas Cowboys. By the way, I have heard that the reason that Kellen Moore left the Dallas Cowboys is because Kellen Moore was effectively in line to become the next head coach of the Dallas Cowboys, but then Mike McCarthy did really well for a couple of years, 12-5, 12-5, 12-5, and then the opportunity was kind of dwindling, and so the two parted ways, the Dallas Cowboys and Kellen Moore. I've heard that from a couple of folks. Just something to keep in mind when you're thinking about like Kellen Moore and, having left Dallas and having left the Los Angeles Chargers. When he left the Los Angeles Chargers, it was because the entire coaching staff was let go, and then Harbaugh took over and brought in everybody that he knew, and then bang, you're out on the market again, and then you land another offensive coordinator job, and then now you're headed to the Super Bowl. So not a bad situation there for Kellen Moore at all. But Brandon Staley, before he was a struggling head coach, was a fantastic defensive coordinator. And right now, he is the assistant head coach over in San Francisco. Him coming over to New Orleans as a defensive coordinator should be something to consider. I've seen it over and over again. Guy hires person. Guy that hired person is no longer in that position. Guy that got hired goes somewhere else. Guy that got hired hires guy who hired guy that got hired. Like, it happens sometimes. Did you track that? Did you track that? I nailed it, by the way. But listen to this. When Brandon Staley got his opportunity as a defensive coordinator with the Rams, here's what he did. Number 1 in scoring, number 1 in total yards, number 1 against the pass, number 3 against the run, number 4 in third down defense, number 4 in red zone defense, number 10 in turnovers forced with 22. New Orleans Saints had 17 turnovers last year for reference. 14 of them came in the first 7 games or 9 games. So Brandon Staley might have hired Kellen Moore at one time, but that doesn't make him immune to being hired by Kellen Moore at another time. And what we saw from Brandon Staley is that, much like Dennis Allen, fantastic defensive coordinator, but when he had to split focus between being a head coach and being a defensive play caller, he crumbled. Same thing that happened to Dennis Allen happened to Brandon Staley. Dennis Allen just got hired over in Chicago. I think Dennis Allen's going to do a great job over there as a defensive coordinator. I think Brandon Staley would also do a great job landing somewhere as a defensive coordinator as well. Could that be here in New Orleans? Put him back in his strength where he has been his strongest, and then give him the opportunity. If you're not comfortable going that route, here's an alternative. Derek Ansley, highly respected around the NFL, spending his time right now with the Green Bay Packers as the defensive pass game coordinator. He could come to New Orleans, potentially become the defensive coordinator. He interviewed for the Falcons. He interviewed with the Falcons for that gig, and he's had some talks with colleges as well as potential DCs. But his time with the Los Angeles Chargers as the defensive coordinator under Brandon Staley did not go well. It was not a top-ranked defense like I just rattled off in terms of Brandon Staley's time with the Los Angeles Rams and all those other things. But remember that wasn't Ansley as a defensive play caller. That was still Brandon Staley, split focus, head coach and defensive play caller. But Ansley is somebody that people think of very highly in NFL circles. It could potentially be a solid defensive coordinator in the NFL. People like him. People like his attitude. People like his leadership ability. He relates to players, all these other things. So just a name to keep in mind as well. Derek Ansley, Ansley, if he ends up becoming a defensive coordinator in New Orleans. Now let's take a look at the pipe dream. All right. Let's all dream a little bit here. Jeff Stoutland, the best offensive line coach in the NFL, period, full stop. Full stop. No further conversation. He, at the moment, is the passing game coordinator and offensive line coach for the Philadelphia Eagles. Is he married to Nick Sirianni? Is he married to the Philadelphia Eagles? Or would he be willing to travel with Kellen Moore after 11 years with the Philadelphia Eagles? Probably seems unlikely, but here's a way to get the conversation started. Hey, Jeff, how you liking the run game? Oh, I think I said pass game coordinator. He's run game coordinator. My apologies. Hey, Jeff, how you liking the run game coordinator job and offensive line job over in Philly? Yeah, you having a good time? Yeah, we did good together. I know I just talked to you last week, but hey, I just got a question for you. How would you like an offensive coordinator title without offensive coordinator responsibilities and without play calling responsibilities? Because I'll handle that, but you'll get paid like an offensive coordinator to come and coach the offensive line. How's that sound? Sound okay? That's not a bad situation. And that would make it unblockable by Philly, right? Because if you're asking him to come over to New Orleans to be the run game coordinator and offensive line coach, Philly can block that because that's a lateral move. You ask him to just come and be an offensive line coach, he's probably flipping you the bird and then he's going on because you're asking him to take a demotion. That ain't happening. So if you're offering him something like an offensive coordinator job / offensive line coach, pay him like an offensive coordinator, but have him come in and coach and turn your offensive line into the best offensive line into the NFL, because that's what Jeff Stoutland does. That's kind of worth it, ain't it? So it's a dream. It's probably unlikely to happen, all those other things, but definitely something to keep in mind that could potentially be an option, right? Something that you should explore. And here's the thing for me. The conversation should happen. Doesn't matter that it's a long shot. Doesn't matter that it's a dream. Doesn't matter that it's pie in the sky. The conversation should happen. And to me, if the conversation happens, that's a good start for Kellen Moore, that you're willing to shoot for the moon, right? You're going to come and coach this team that is so important to this community, this fan base, this city that has been through so much, that this team has also been a part of. And the connection is unlike any other professional team to its city in the world of sports. You better be ready to arrive here and shoot for the stars. And that's what I think you need to see from Kellen Moore, assuming he's the hire for the New Orleans Saints. All right, y'all, coming up in tomorrow's episode as we continue 7 days a week here on Locked On Saints. What are some of the concerns when it comes to Kellen Moore? Leadership, style, ferocity, all those things are some of my concerns. So let's break down what that actually means and why it's not the concern that's more important. It's the response to the concern. How does he handle it? That's going to be the big thing. We're going to break all that down in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.